Welcome to CECH Chats, a podcast from the University of Cincinnati's College of Education, Criminal Justice, Human Services, and Information Technology. In this podcast, we speak with faculty about their ongoing research, chat with students about the work they do in CECH, learn from staff members about their important roles in the college, and more. Hi, I'm Rodney Wilson, Content Specialist for CECH. Today's CECH Chats welcomes Tina Stanton-Chapman, a professor of early childhood education and human development at the University of Cincinnati and a Fulbright Specialist Scholar for the U.S. Department of Defense. She specializes in the development of peer relationships in children with disabilities, specifically preschoolers with specific language impairment, behavioral disorders, and autism spectrum disorder. Her current research centers on designing playgrounds that incorporate the principles of universal design, where all individuals are able to participate and play regardless of age, gender, race, ethnicity, culture, and ability. This interest can be traced all the way back to 1997 during her time as a teacher at Miami-Dade Public Schools, when she observed two of her students who, due to special needs, were unable to enjoy recess on the playground with the rest of the class. The moment was a catalyst for her research, and today she's designed 4 playgrounds that are accessible to not only children of all abilities, but also the adults who accompany them. In this episode, Stanton-Chapman tells us about designing playgrounds that adhere to universal design. She talks about the challenges of aligning academic research with the business operations of playground manufacturers, bringing zip lines to American playgrounds, benefits of accessible equipment for grandparents, and more. I thank you for joining us today, Tina.
Thank you for having me.
To get started, tell us about yourself.
I'm originally actually from Cincinnati, Ohio. I've kind of moved around a bit. I grew up on the west side of town in White Oak. And then I did my undergraduate at UC, but I was in the psychology program and graduated with honors there. And then I moved off to Miami to attend the University of Miami in Florida to work on a master's degree in early childhood special education. And I also taught when I was there in a pre-K special education program for a couple years. And then I went to Nashville to get a doctorate at Vanderbilt in early childhood special ed. And then my first job was at the University of Virginia as my faculty position, where I coordinated their early childhood special ed program. And later, I also added on their severe disabilities program.
Were you always interested in education and childhood experience, or is that something that you developed while in college?
I was interested in children's peer relationships. So when I was at UC in the honors program, we had to do working on an honors capstone project or a thesis. And I joined in. He's no longer here. He's at the University of Pittsburgh, but it was Robert Knoll. And he did a study on peer relationships of children who had chronic illnesses. And so I joined in and really learned research as a process as an undergrad, which was really unique because not many undergrads get an opportunity to collect data, be a part of a research project, do a poster presentation at a national conference, and then be able to publicize their work. So I did that. But then when I was going to the University of Miami, I originally wanted to do developmental psychology, but the person I wanted to work with, Annette LaGreca, was not accepting students because she was looking at how children, because Hurricane Andrew had just happened in, I think it was 92, and I was applying to go there in 95. She was studying how children, peer relationships were impacted by Hurricane Andrew. But she wasn't accepting students. But then they said that there was a person in their education department named Sharon Vaughn, who's now at Texas and does the science of reading that we've had to do in Ohio. But she was there at the time at University of Miami studying the peer relationships of students with learning disabilities. And so I actually switched my discipline to go into education. And then she was able to support my tuition and funding while I was there so I could work on her project, which was a fantastic learning opportunity.
All right. And then your PhD at Vanderbilt. Can you share some of the work that you were doing in that avenue of study?
Sure. So I worked closely with Ann Kaiser, who studies language development and how parents can do interventions with their students. At the time, she was working with students who had language impairments, and she was teaching parents how to facilitate language in their young children who were delayed. She focused on 3 to 5 year olds. But she knew my interest in peer relationships. So she had just gotten a grant from the US Department of Education focusing on peers, how it could peers implement training, but instead of the adults. And so when I went to Vanderbilt in the early childhood special ed program, she asked me to lead that project on how do we get 3, 4, and 5 year olds to be able to help kids who struggle with language impairments to talk. And so I developed a study under her mentorship on using storybooks to guide both the target child and the peer on how to initiate conversations, how to respond to a peer's initiation or to play or initiation of talking, how to turn take, because a lot of students with language impairments have a hard time interacting with peers. And usually it's a one word response, but they don't maintain that. So we worked on how do you maintain play or conversation, and how do you appropriately get someone's attention. So I did that for 4 years, and that became part of my dissertation because Anne quickly learned that she was not interested in the peer work as much as she was on how to, because her project's Kid Talk, and she developed what's called milieu teaching. She was more interested in the parent piece, and she has since worked with students with autism and then young infants and toddlers on training parents. But she gave me a wonderful opportunity to work with peers and make that my research agenda and take that off to the University of Virginia when I first started my faculty work.
And as you said, you were at the University of Virginia for a little over 10 years?
Yes, 11 years.
Okay. And then what was it like coming back to Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati, and coming back to where you did your undergraduate work?
It was a little bit of a learning curve in the sense that UC has more first-gen students than Virginia had at the time. And so it was really learning to work with students who they haven't had family members who've gone through college before. So it was a different learning curve because at UVA, many of the lobbyists in Congress and senators from DC, their children went to UVA. So they had a very different perspective, and they always knew that they were going to college, but at UC, that always isn't the case with the students that we have. So I've also found it not only a learning curve, but it was an opportunity to really get students invested in research. And so I've been able to work with some undergraduate and graduate students on building their research agenda, because some students are interested in that, but they don't even know where to start.
Yeah. Well, now we're going to talk about your research. Your current research centers on designing playgrounds that incorporate the principles of universal design. Can you explain to me and our listeners what is meant by universal design?
So universal design is an approach that how I took right now, it started out of architecture, and it was a lot on how we can make things, everyday environments, work for people with disabilities. And when I got interested in playgrounds because when I first started my teaching job I was teaching in Miami-Dade Public Schools. I came into a pre-K program. My class was 24 students with 12 at risk and 12 students who had disabilities. And so when I went on the playground, I noticed that 2 students in particular could not interact at all. They were basically doing nothing. I had one little boy who was diagnosed with autism. And at that time, which was, I was teaching in 97, IDEA it came out in 1990, and we were still learning how to teach students with autism. It was a basically new category. Our training programs didn't really get us too involved with that. And when this little boy went out on the playground, he never went on the playground equipment. He spent most of his time circling the playground and picking grass, but would not interact with other kids. And I was fascinated. I couldn't figure out what was it. And then another student I had in my class was in a wheelchair. And prior to me coming there, because I came at the beginning of the year, they were used to it was hard for the students in a wheelchair to get around because the student was not mobile. So she crawled in the classroom. And so many of the teachers there would just set the students in wheelchairs around the playground, but would never let them get out of their wheelchair. And that really bothered me because for that 30 minutes, that student and the student with autism really never had a chance to explore. And so I that's what made me interested in playgrounds, but it wasn't something that my mentor at Vanderbilt was going to let me, because she knew better, to study as a doc student. Because when I got into playgrounds, I realized that it's a business. And it's a completely different beast than research, because I learned that engineers don't necessarily have child development knowledge. They're trying to build the best, the coolest playground out there, but they weren't necessarily thinking about all abilities. They're just trying to build a product. And so the universal design aspect is I try to think about what are the abilities that kids have that they bring to the playground setting, and how can we make this a good opportunity for the students. And so I realized quickly that playgrounds weren't working for kids. And what the playground industry was focusing on were mobility concerns. The law under that guides playgrounds is the American Disabilities Act, ADA. And it's basically just making sure that they can get from point A to point B, but really it doesn't really care about can they actually interact and enjoy or have interest in that environment. So the universal design aspect is really focusing on what are they bringing and how can I optimize that? And so one thing I did was think about sensory disabilities, because that was missing. And so instead of thinking of a deficit approach, which is what was currently going on, I was thinking about what can we do that is going to capture their attention.
So kind of getting into the idea of accessibility, what are some examples of pieces of playground equipment that would fall under this category of intentionally accessible?
So at West Fork Park, which is what I did, it's on the west side of town, that was the first time really anybody had focused on sensory. And so there, a colleague that does playgrounds with me, he is on the installing and manufacturer side. And so we kind of got together to think about how can we build a sensory maze? And so there wasn't any products out there at all, because at the time, playground manufacturers weren't thinking about anything to do with sensory. So we went to this place out in Salt Lake City. They design panels for businesses. It's more art that has textures on it, and they're colorful. So we got this crazy idea to go out to Salt Lake and kind of pitch our idea. Could we use these panels that are good for outdoors and put them with some kind of mechanism to build a sensory maze? And we went out there. At first, they were apprehensive about the project because they said, this is art, this isn't what kids play with. And so we had to do a little convincing. And then one of the higher administrators within the company had a nephew with autism. And when I when we met with him, I explained, look, there's children that just don't benefit from a playground. And from the research I did from 2011 to about 2017, and I have some publications, I think I sent some of those to you. Mm-hmm. What parents and caregivers and professionals in education were saying were missing from playgrounds that the playground industry wasn't paying attention to. And he latched on to what I was saying, and then he was able to convince people to allow us to use these panels to build a maze. And so that was the first project that a piece of equipment that we developed. We figured out the mechanism to put them together because the panels were just these plexiglass type panels. And we worked with another company to get them to figure out how they can do some kind of connecting mechanism to form the maze. And then it's kind of exploded since then, because from my research, some of the manufacturers caught wind of what we were doing. And then now you see the focus on sensory in a lot of their catalogs. Now, is all of it accurate, what they should be doing? No, but it's a better attempt.
And you also designed a park, Rebecca Park in Indiana. Yes. Does that one also contain a maze?
Yes, it's a little bit different. That started because the police chief at the time of Greensburg, his son was going to therapies at Children's Hospital. He has significant autism, and when he was there, they asked him, "Oh, you go along 74. Have you ever tried taking your son to West Fork Park?" And he hadn't at the time. And he had reached out to me because I was at the time on their website, to any questions to reach out to me. And he did. And he said, "I want something like this here." And it's really hard because I can't get a grant to do construction. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these, like West Fork, was done out of funding from property taxes. And so they put out a bid, and they were able to secure, they chose our project over other projects, but it's not something I can just write a grant for. So the police chief in Greenberg said he wanted to fundraise, and he got together a lot of families to get that together. But it was the sensory maze that no one has seen anything like that before. Mm. And he wanted to have something similar. His is a little bit smaller because there were new pieces of playground equipment that came out that he wanted to add there too. So we wanted for a smaller maze than what you see at West Fork.
Okay. And West Fork, you take your elementary education students out there as well. It's an educational tool in addition to being a community resource and a resource for research.
Yes. So we go every September, because we also in education have universal design of instruction, thinking about how teachers can set up the environment, not focusing on the students' disabilities, but focusing on their abilities and interest. And so I use West Fork as a means to show, if you do it well, you can't really tell that what this playground is or what their instruction is really also for students with disabilities. Like West Fork is really built for students with disabilities, but when you go to the park, many of the patrons there, including parents and the administrators, didn't know that we were targeting. It's mainly a playground for students with disabilities.
And you've written about the need for collaboration between academics and the professionals on the manufacturing side, and you mentioned that just a couple of minutes ago. And I know you've done some research into that as well. Have you come to any potential solutions for kind of bridging that communication gap?
I will say it's been somewhat of a challenge because in education or psychology, we've always been told that there's a research you have to do, and this is how you study phenomena. You have to do a rigorous test, then you have to replicate it. Well, that doesn't really happen in the playground industry. So I learned that when they test playgrounds, they basically, an architect comes up with a design, an engineer makes a cardboard rendering of it, they set it up in their like office, like business office space, and then they have their kids try it out. And if their kids like it, then they go forward with it. There really isn't a scientific test. So I had to learn really quick that a lot of time, and when I was interacting with some of the people who reached out about the maze and what they could do, what aspects of it could they do as part of their designs, I could tell they didn't know a lot about child development principles. So, for example, some of them were thinking that kids at 12 months were doing their alphabet, and that's not the case. Or kids learn by looking at pictures. A lot of the playground equipment for younger kids was a picture, and kids are supposed to come up with a way after looking at that picture how to play. And I was trying to explain that doesn't happen. They need hands-on activities. And so it's worked in some ways, because now there's Miracle Play Systems has a housing set that they use. It's different from the one we used at West Fork, because that was new, but they asked me for input. And I said, well, instead of having houses that parents can't get into, you should think about expanding it so adults can play. You need things that kids can spin, turn. It's not just looking at a picture and they're not going to be creative. They're too little to do that yet. That happens when they're 8, 9, 10, but not at 2, 3, 4. They need something to touch. And so that's been a little different. And then many times once they put the playground in, it's never tested again. No one asked, how is this working? Could we improve on it? What's good? What's bad? And so they're slowly taking in research that I've done at West Fork, saying just because it looks good and some kids like it, not all kids like it. And so it's been a back and forth process. I didn't anticipate all of that when I did it.
The research is fascinating. Looking through some of the studies that you sent over, one thing that really jumped out is we think of accessibility in terms of access for children and children with disabilities, but also the grandparent study finding that grandparents were more likely to engage with kids in their play, and it actually increased the length of time that grandparents kept their kids at playgrounds to play. Could you tell me a bit about that study and your findings, and were you surprised by anything?
As I was doing my initial research to find out what was working and what wasn't, what a lot of parents and grandparents were saying was that usually communities build one big structure and don't have multiple pieces of equipment. And what we were finding in that work was that some grandparents, they don't have the ability to climb like they used to. And so a lot of the complaints that they were having about currently available playgrounds was having high structures that their grandchild could climb up. But then if something happened, they weren't able to go retrieve their child or help them problem solve to get them down. Sometimes a child would go up, realize the slide's too high, don't want to come down, and then they cry. And the grandparent's stuck unless they get another adult who's able to go retrieve their grandchild for them. And so we realized that the playground industry wasn't tapping into grandparents. And we know from now there's a lot of research showing that with millennials in particular, that they're not using as much childcare centers. They're using their child's grandparents to watch their children, especially in those birth to 5 years. And grandparents are taking their kids to the playground. And so it wasn't anything that was tapped into. And so we thought it would be a great opportunity, along with focusing on disabilities, if we thought of more ground level equipment, because grandparents weren't saying that they didn't want to participate and play. Half the time they said, the most I can do is sit on a bench and watch, and hopefully everything goes well, or just follow them around. But as soon as they climb, I can't get there. So we knew we should tap into this, because there's a population that they're watching their grandkids. They want to play with their grandkids. We just need to find the activities that they're able to do that the child's already going to be interested in too. Now, that doesn't mean West Fork does have a tall structure, because not all kids like to be at ground level, but there are multiple things at West Fork, for example, that they could do that grandparents can participate in. And so that worked. We didn't really, I was really shocked by the study, how much I didn't anticipate. I thought maybe they'd participate and play for about 15, 20 minutes and then let the kids run off. But what my doc students and I found is that 45 minutes, 30 minutes, they keep coming back to the same environment because they do want to play. They still have that ability to move around. It's just that they can't go high comfortably.
Your research also found that children just generally prefer these universally designed playgrounds, and they choose to spend more time on them than a community alternative.
Yes. So what we were finding is, like most communities, they invest in a really large structure, sometimes having a swing set to accompany it, because they spend their budget on that big structure takes up their whole budget. But not all kids are able to climb. Not all kids are able to use their upper body strength very well. Not all kids like to be up high. So we were finding, by having a number of different activities, and that's the one thing, because West Fork really wanted a swing set, a large structure. And when we did our proposal to them and said, look, we have musical instruments that are metal that actually hold tune, but the musical instruments also, the chimes that are there, they vibrate so hard that people who are deaf can actually feel music. Yeah. And we brought in a zip line that at the time we didn't have any in North America. We had that shipped in from Poland, and it was considered like a risky type play, but it was different things that if you didn't like one thing, you didn't have to play on that, but you could do something else. And there was enough there by having those 7 play zones that there was something for everybody that they could do. Could they maybe not do everything that works, but there was other things that they could do. And I found that the kids were getting really imaginative too, like the sensory maze. At West Fork, they've never changed the configuration the way it is. They could change it if they wanted every so many months to have the exit and entrance at a different place. They didn't, because what they're finding is that grandparents or parents would bring picnics there. They have picnics within the maze. They're playing hide and seek. They're doing other things besides just doing the entrance and exit. And so they didn't want to change it. But by having all those multiple activities, kids want to stay longer. And if they're crying, it's usually because their parents or caregivers are telling them it's time to go, which is a good problem to have. We ran into other problems that we didn't think about. I don't know if I talk about it a lot in my articles, but parking was an issue. Green Township had enough spaces, but on nice days, you could have over 100 kids there. I mean, we've counted over, I think the highest we got was 226 kids at one time. That's not including their parents. It's just the kids, which is huge. And there wasn't enough parking. So a lot of parents park. There's a neighborhood across the street that they were parking in, and Green Township was going to buy property, a house that was next door. And we said, that might not be a good idea because we already have 200 kids with the current available parking. You might double that. And we've seen when it first opened in 2017, we had by 2019 already like 8 years of wear and tear in the playground. Everything's under warranty and we're able to fix it, but it's overused. And we didn't want them to find out, because when you have many, many kids, then other behavior problems come out.
And you found that style of play was affected by the different approach to designing a playground. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So most of the research on playgrounds just looks at how kids play. But what I noticed was, and most of it is done on school playgrounds, and one thing that was bothering me was people say, well, kids always like playgrounds, but I knew from the students I had at school, not all kids participate on school playgrounds. So I wanted to figure out what is it. And so I had my participants do a school playground, and those same participants came to West Fork, and and they didn't come together. I had them come they played together on the school playground, but when they came to West Fork, they didn't time it at the same time because I wanted to see how did they play. And what I found was you do see different types of play, but it's based on the context, who's there. At school, a lot of times they know the kids, they know their peers, they're more willing to engage and talk because they know what those abilities are. But when they're sent to like West Fork, for example, they didn't know all the kids. A lot of times they were strangers. And some of the kids, if they didn't have those outgoing skills, they didn't jump in and play with other kids. They kind of watched what was going on, despite having the skills that they could do. They could do that because I saw it happen at the school playground. It's just that the context of who was there doesn't necessarily always lead to that cooperative play. Now, if you read a playground manufacturer's catalog, they're going to say all of this equipment leads to cooperative play. But in my mind, it's context. Who's there? Who's on that equipment? How outgoing the student is? And you find more of the cooperative type play on school environments, but it's not because of that equipment. It's because of the kids who are there. Whereas West Fork, you have all that equipment, but if they're not willing to engage with other kids, they're not going to do it. And so we could see that kids had the same skills, but they used them differently depending on the context.
Interesting. Well, at the end of all this, the goal is to get kids outside and playing as opposed to some of the indoor alternatives that are always threatening that kind of play. Can you share a bit with me and our listeners about why it is important to get kids outside, enjoying the fresh air and each other?
The playground environment is an excellent opportunity to get kids to be around kids of all ages. Because when you see it, a school playground, they tend to be on recess with same age, same ability level peers in general. When they go to a community playground, they see kids of all ages, abilities, races, ethnicities. They get to see a lot of diversity. And so going outside, this gives them the opportunity to socially interact and see how different diverse people interact, test their abilities, because that one kid could not be able to do there's a turf hill there. They may not be able to climb up it the first time, but going out there multiple times, they build their skills over time, and it gets them to challenge themselves. And I really like the social interaction piece because staying at home, it's with the same siblings, same parents. They may not always get that type of play. And interestingly, the structure that came at West Fork, there was a system that you don't use. We didn't even advertise it, but it came with the structure. It was BB. And what it was is that the playground manufacturers were trying to get kids to do physical activity, but they would use a parent's or their own cell phone, and they would take they could use the QR code that was on the playground and would tell them to go over to the slide and do 5 jumping jacks. But we didn't advertise that because we wanted kids to get away social media and their cell phone devices. It's there, and it's at West Fork. But we wanted kids to play and to socially interact, to be able to challenge themselves. And that's not always done on social media. So I think the outdoor play gives them all those opportunities.
You've done a lot of interesting research on this playground. What are you studying right now? What are you looking at?
Right now, I'm going to start looking at because I have videotapes of some kids on playgrounds. I want to look at I've never looked at the interactions that take place on the playground. So I want to do some comparison. I did it with the one study comparing the school versus the community playground, but I want to actually look at how are we building language and social skills on playgrounds. Like, if you have a well-designed playground environment, does that help improve language and social skills on the playground? So my team is going to start transcribing all that data, and then we're going to code it to see how kids build their skills over time.
So, have there been any challenges to your work that you've faced as you do this design work and the research associated with the playgrounds?
No, I think the hardest thing is trying to bridge the business world with the research world, because I think there's many opportunities out there to collaborate with the manufacturers, but they get hung up on research takes too much time to really study what works and what doesn't work, where they're on a business plan. We got to make our money and get going. And what I'm finding is that a lot of now they're coming out with a lot of, if you look at some of the manufacturers' catalogs, now they're doing these cage type structures, which look really nice, but they're using my framework because they're aware of what I do. They don't necessarily always want to talk to me, but they get a hold of these academic journals. And they're saying the terminology that I use, saying kids of all abilities can play on that. And that I can look at it and say that that's not true. That's not going to happen. So I'm trying to figure out, and that's my next, how do I tackle that? Because a lot of communities don't have experts like me or someone else who they can reach out to get, okay, should we buy this or not? They just go to a manufacturer who gives them a salesperson who's willing just to sell them anything for their budget. And they're going to max out their budget. If they have $250,000 to spend on the playground, that salesperson's going to make sure they do it, but not necessarily is that equipment going to be beneficial for the community. And I find a lot of times communities will build a playground and then they're disappointed. So I haven't quite figured out how to tackle that. If you have any ideas, let me know. Because I get community officials call me all the time at UC saying, we are unhappy with this and we can't do anything about it now. We wasted our money. What can I do? And so then I give them word on what they could do when they build their next playground. But that might not be for 10, 15, 20 years because these playgrounds are built to last for a long time. So maybe helping communities more, and I'm one person trying to do it. It's been challenging.
I'm definitely interested in hearing more about your findings as you continue to learn from these play spaces. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your work with our listeners and the CECH community today.
Great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of CECH Chats, a presentation of UC's College of Education, Criminal Justice, Human Services, and Information Technologies Marketing Department. CECH Chats is edited and produced by me, Rodney Wilson. To learn more about the college and its programs, visit us online at cech.uc.edu. While you're there, check out the CECH headlines page for recent stories, past episodes of CECH Chats, and more. Until next time, thanks for joining us.